were 2 or 3 of us asking for initiation, so we each wrote him a personal letter. And I remember that distinctly too, because in the letter I wrote, you know, a few things, how it was going for me and my commitment to Krishna consciousness. But I remember putting in there that I was becoming very happy following this process. So when I got the letter back from Prabhupada to accept me as a disciple, I really noted how that's what he focused on. That, you know, I'm so glad that you're becoming happy. And, you know, at that time and even later I've thought about that and how, in a way, that really characterizes to me a lot of what Prabhupada felt towards not just his disciples, but in the way people of the world, that he really wanted everyone to become happy. And he was teaching us about Krishna consciousness because from his enlightened perspective, he could see that we wouldn't become happy through any other means than realizing our constitutional position. So as we started to feel that and you know, experience that even in a very limited way, he immediately picked up on it and encouraged that. And I remember that quite distinctly too from that initial letter. And the first time he actually communicated with me, you know, and said, you know, my dear Bhutatma, which was, you know, I got the name at that time too, of course.
He rang the bell, and then he called me in, and I rushed in and said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. By the way, that was a new expression at that point, even in '68. Before, it was only Swamiji, only months before. Yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he looks at me, he goes, first of all, you have forgotten to pay your obeisances. So I go like this, because I had rushed in, you know, right out of the sleeping bag, hit the floor, and then I hear this chuckling, chuckling going on. Srila Prabhupada's kind of low chuckle. And he says, that's all right, that's all right. It's all just for practice. So then he called me over. He said, come on, sit down. He said, why have you called me here to Santa Fe? And then you tell me to go to Los Angeles. Now, of course, I had nothing to do with this. I was barely 18, in the movement for 2 months. And Srila Prabhupada's, so I figured out later he just kind of wanted to talk to me, loosen me up a little bit. But at the time I couldn't, I was kind of startled. So why have you called me here to Santa Fe? And then you tell me to go. So I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, Govindadasi, and that's as far as I got. Here I was a brahmachari, and he was going to train me. Govindadasi, never listen to a woman. It's as far as I got. Now, he loved Srila Govindadasi. Govindadasi would go wherever he went, or he would send her in advance to check things out. He trusted her very much. She and her husband did illustrations for books and so forth. But kind of in a tease, he says, never listen to a woman. Then he leans back, looks at me again and said, so what did she say? So I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, I mean, she said that, you know, this is a very elevated place, Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's on the Continental Divide. He looks at me and says, you're an intelligent boy. I don't know why, you know, just because I mentioned Continental Divide. And we're up in the, you know, upper atmosphere here. The air is thin, and you're a heart patient. And, oh, so you think I will come here and die? He opens up his eyes really wide. So now I'm really, I don't know what to say, you know. Just says, oh, so many people are living here? I cannot come? So that conversation, then we chanted japa. And actually, before he did that, he sang, or kind of recited the samsara prayers. We're just the two of us there. And he sat and he was just, as Srila Prabhupada would often do, rub his knee as he sat. And samsara dava nalalita loka, he just sang it, kind of sang it and recited it without kartals or mridanga or anything. And then we chanted japa.
I was in Kanpur distributing Back to Godhead magazines. This was 77. So there was Ram Leela festival going on. So the Bullock Cart party wanted to make use of this crowd. So myself and Ravidas from England, so we were going around the Ramlila grounds and we wanted to take a little rest. So we came under a little building and I saw the signboard there. It had a Bengali signboard and English. There was Mr. Chatterjee and he was the marriage registration officer of the town. So I told Ravidas that, well, this is Bengali here, so let's go and try to give him a magazine. So we went up the staircase, was third floor of that building. Very narrow staircase, and we walk inside this Paka Bengali looking house, old paintings hanging and big bookshelf and easy chair, and Mr. Chatterjee was sitting there. So I went up to him, greeted him, and I gave him one Back to Godhead magazine. So we looked at the Back to Godhead, then he said, do you know that when Prabhupada was distributing his Back to Godhead magazines, he stayed in this place? So I said, oh really, that's interesting. So he shows us around the house. This is where he used to sit, this is where he used to cook, and then there is a line on the top, cloth line. He said, we reserved this line for him. And he said that we never used it. Only his clothes will be drying there. Then we came down, we sat down in his study. So then he brought me this book, Bhagavatam, signed by Prabhupada, the old copy, and some translations underlined about the personal form of the Lord. So then he told that, that he was a follower of Arya Samaj. And Arya Samaj people, they don't have deities. And they do some yajnas and they stick to some Rigvedic verses and all. So Prabhupada used to make joke on him. He said that Prabhupada used to say that I know what you Arya Samajis do. When you see a Vishnu temple, you look both sides, and if nobody is looking at you, then you pay obeisances. And then you say, oh, I'm sorry for offending you. And he said, then he said that when he first brought Prabhupada into his quarters, he was telling him that I have been following Arya Samaj, but within home I was still being old Vedic style. I have been worshipping the 5 Murtis, Shiva, Ganesh, like that. Then he said, but I never get any feeling, neither from the Arya Samaj activities nor from this Vedic life. So Prabhupada spoke to him. He said that that day Prabhupada spoke to him for over 1 hour on the personal and impersonal features of the Lord. Then later on when Prabhupada came after printing the book, he underlined this translation and gave it to him. Then he said, because you think the Lord is impersonal, this is why you are not getting any experience. And while saying this man was totally moved. Then he said that from that time, after Swami Maharaj left, he didn't come back to Kanpur anymore. Then he said, but then I became a personalist. And then he showed his study. There was the Gaunita and Radhakrishna deities. Then he said that what our grandfather used to do, I came back in that line. Then now I'm worshipping Radha and Krishna. Then he said, Prabhupada used to take my daughter on his lap and feed her the tomato rice cooked by him. Then he said that luckily she is here with her children for holidays. And then he called her, and this lady came, and she said that, Prabhupada said that you should just take prasad. Don't worry about anything else that your father says. Because she used to get preached that God has no form and don't worship the deity and things like that. So she remembered that, just take prasad, you will become okay. Then she said, I was a personalist all the time.
At one point in India, we had just arrived and we went in Vrindavan and we went right into Prabhupada's room for darshan, which was filled with, devotees, maybe 24 devotees. And I sat in the back with my son and my daughter. And actually, I think I just had my daughter, because my son stayed outside at that point. But he, I sat down quietly. My daughter got up. She was 1 year old, and she started walking up to Prabhupada. And the brahmachari at the door started waving me down, trying to get my attention. You know, no, get her. You know, bring her back. You know, he's like motioning me to get the child and bring her back. You can't do that. You know, and I just sort of looked at him like, you know, looked out of the corner of my eye, saw him waving at me, and conveniently ignored him and looked at Prabhupada and made a motion like should I go get her, you know, and Prabhupada put his hand up to stop, you know. He said, no, just sit down, you know, because he could see the brahmachari flipping out at the door. And then I looked at Prabhupada for the last instruction on that. I wasn't going to just accept this fellow at the door. So he told me to sit, and Shantaya proceeded to walk up to Prabhupada's desk, you know, and I had no idea what she was going to do up there at one. You know, she started to look around Prabhupada's desk and walk around, and then she looked at Prabhupada, and she walked over to him and climbed right up, crawled right across his lap and sat down on his lap. You know? So everything else, all other conversations stopped as she took the show with Prabhupada, you know, just exchanging their exchanges at that point, where he was playing with her and giving her a flower, and you know, she was playing with his garland, and then, you know, she moved on and crawled off his lap, and, you know, he gave her a flower to take with her, and she came, you know, then he nodded to me to come and take her, you know, and so I picked her up and took her back to sit down. But it was just Prabhupada's, you know, his unlimited exchanges, you know, with whoever, no matter what age they were, no matter who the devotee was, you know, it was his, you know, the relationship building, you know, he was always exchanging in a sweet relationship, even with the youngest children. You know.
One time I was serving Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan, and as his custom was, after he would give evening darshan, he would distribute prasadam. So as a servant, he would nod, and you would run up, and usually had a jar of sweet balls on his desk. So I came up, he was giving darshan in the evening, Brijvasis were there, so many were there. And he nodded, so I went up and I opened the jar, and there were ants all over the sweet balls. So I said, Srila Prabhupada, the ants are eating the sweet balls, thinking I couldn't pass them out. Srila Prabhupada looked at me and said, it is okay, they do not eat very much.
Going back, my parents had come with me, so they walked the path. And then later that evening, there was a darshan, and I was asked to come because I had my parents. And while we sat, we were making dolls, puppet dolls in Detroit, so I was asked to carry it. Prabhupada asked me, what is that you have? And I said, well, it's a puppet, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, this, you must not do this because people will think we're worshiping dolls. So I was, you know, then someone came and took the puppet. Then later on in the darshan, my parents were with me, and he was asking for questions. Prabhupada was asking questions. And so my father raised his hand, and he said, well, you were mentioning that Christians are saying, give us our daily bread, but actually, you know, the animals are eating. Prabhupada was explaining that there's no need in Christians. And so my father said, well, what about, you know, we're not just asking for bread, we're asking for cake, we're asking for everything. And Prabhupada instantly cut him off and said, what do you know? What are you knowing? And he went on to further the point, and he just dismissed. So we were kind of both dismissed immediately. My father's reaction was a little bit stunned, and he really didn't have a comeback for him. Luckily, he didn't argue with him. He just kind of let it. I think the environment, we were all squished in a room. Prabhupada obviously was the authoritative figure, and he wasn't about to start a huge fight with him. He was upset. Both his daughters, only daughters, had joined, so he had a little charge in there.
We were walking along, and maybe everyone has heard this by now, but we were walking along, Prabhupada stopped. Now, I grew up near the beach, and I used to surf and live, camp on the beach a lot overnight. And like a lot of other people, I suppose, I always really enjoyed the sound of the waves as they break and then draw back out. It makes kind of that, that real pleasing sound as it comes in and then ebbs back out. And we stopped and we were listening to that for a minute. Prabhupada stopped on the beach, and then he said, "This sound of the waves retreating is the sound of the gopis sighing for Krishna." And I always thought, well, no wonder it's so pleasing. And ever since then, when I hear that sound, of course, I think of that and how it is really kind of a mournful, bittersweet sound. So that was nice.
So I found a piece of cloth. Again, back then, we couldn't even afford to have flowers in the temple. It was temples usually didn't even have telephones back then. The payphone around the corner was the method of communication. So we didn't have any money or something to give Srila Prabhupada, but I found a cloth in an abandoned Catholic church, old rustic thing, and in the cloth itself was a beautiful piece of luxurious velvet with some trim on it. So I showed it to Srila Prabhupada and said, "Could you use this?" And actually, Govinda Dasi saw it, and she said, "Tosan, Krishna wants to know if you want this." And things were being packed. Srila Prabhupada's pointing, "Put this thing away, put this here, now roll this, put this here." He's being very exacting. And he says, "I want nothing." And the room shook. It was just like Lord Nrsingadev had entered the room. We were just, Srila Prabhupada so sweet, and then "I want nothing." The room shook. And I didn't know what was going to happen with that piece of cloth after that. Well, I did visit Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles only 2 months later, and Srila Prabhupada was using it as his backdrop for his deities. So I thought it was, he wants nothing, but he'll engage it for his deities.
Then when I was in Bangalore, this is early 80s, you had to make, at least you have to make 2 life members in the month because you're maintained by the temple. So they expected you to bring in some collection. And I was a very bad life membership maker. So, but I had to do 2 in a month. And that month was already after 20th, and there's only 10 days left. So I was taking the telephone directory and I was just looking some Bengali names again, so it will be much easier for me to do. Then I found this one Ganguly name. So I thought, well, let's make some appointment with him. I called up that place. It said some factory name. So I thought it must be some chemical factory and it will be easy to go and see him. I called up and then I said, "I'm speaking from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. I want to come and see you today." So Mr. Ganguly sounded very positive. He said, "Oh, you are from Hare Krishna movement. Yeah, you please come at 11 o'clock and see me." So I took the membership form and one small set of books and one poster and like that. And then I went to see this place on Tumkur Road. But I found that this was a huge place. This was like almost equal to the aeronautical engineering place in Bangalore. I didn't expect. And as I started seeing the compound wall as the auto rickshaw was driving in, I was losing hope that there is no way this man is going to become member by me. Seems to be a huge place. And then I went one secretary, then another secretary, then another secretary, and it was already my appointment time, and I'm still with secretaries. And he seemed to be the topmost man of the place. So I'm almost losing all the faith. Maybe when I go there, he will say, we already have 10 life memberships in Calcutta, so maybe he will give me, a galta, ask me to go back. So still I thought, well, having come all the way, I should see him. So they brought me finally into this big air-conditioned cabin, and there was a meeting going on, and then he actually closed the meeting. He told everybody, I have to talk to the Hare Krishna now, so you all go. And then they all left. So I came in, I spread the book on his table and put the poster up, and then I can see that I won't have much time with this man, so I wanted to be really short. So I said, I'm sure you know about this movement, and we are having a branch here, and we don't have a land yet, and maybe we will get one. We have applied, and here is a set of books, and this is a great work. You are a Bengali, you should be proud of this, because our Guru Maharaj is also a Bengali, and he has spread Hare Krishna all around the world, and I'm sure you appreciate this service, so if you could take one life membership. And then I became silent. So he opened his drawer and took his checkbook. So then he said, what is the amount? So I said, 2,222. And he said, it's okay. So I give you a donation. You can make one life membership also. And he wrote some 10,000 something and tore the check and gave it to me. So I was very moved. I said, oh, thank you very much. This is a very nice gesture of you. So then he said, sit down. I want to tell you, I didn't do this convinced by your preaching. So I said, oh, well, I didn't think I convinced you either, but anyway, this is very nice contribution. So he said, but listen, sit down. I want to tell you something. He said, my father, Ganguly, he was a classmate of your founder, Acharya. Then he said that every day he came to our house and he played chess with my father before going to the college, to the school, Matilal Free School. So he said, Prabhupada will come with, in the bike with his little tiffin for the lunch, and they will play chess, Mr. Ganguly and Abai. And if Ganguly gets defeated, then he will have to feed Prabhupada with his lunch. If Prabhupada is defeated, then it's the other way, so he will take. And almost every day, Prabhupada defeated him. And then Ganguly was taking his lunch. This also means that he gave his lunch to him. So it's like you conquer the other person's lunch. That's the stake for the chess play. So he said that this was the childhood times of my father. He said then he became a Sanskrit scholar, his father, and he was teaching in the local university, Ravindra Bharati there. And he used to always speak about, that this founder of Hare Krishna movement, that Maharaj was my classmate, and he was coming every day, and he will tell about a childhood Leela with him. And how Abai always told him that later on when he does something, he would take his help. That you should help me later on when I do something. And then he always said, what is that something? So he said, later on I will be doing something, then I need your help. But there was no more explanation this. What was this something that he was going to do? So then he grows up, he becomes a Sanskrit PhD, becomes a professor, he gets married, and he has children. And then he comes to know that the same Abai Babu has become a Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he went to New York and so on and so forth. And it's a local center in Albert Road, so he has gone there a few times. And then they were saying that Prabhupada was coming to visit. So at this time, the junior Ganguly, he is now in high school, So he comes with his mother to see Prabhupada. Continuously 2-3 days he has come, and there is Guru Puja and there is class, and then in the class Prabhupada looks around and then looks at him because he looks just like his father. So he says, Apnar naam ki, kutay te kya asichin? So then he says, I am Ganguly, I am son of Sister Ganguly. He said, oh, where is he? He didn't come? You tell him, I want to see him. So the mother and son, they come back, and then the son told the father that Maharaj wants to see you. So his father says, how can I go and see him? He is the guru of the world, and here I am a Griha Medhi and this, that. And so the son says, but he wants to see you. Tomorrow he's going to ask us, why didn't you bring your father? Then he said, well, you tell him that I am sick. So he didn't want to go because he's feeling shy. He's feeling too small and shy. He is, world guru. He's got all foreigners sitting at his feet. And so then they come back, and then before starting the class, Prabhupada looks at him and he said, your father didn't come? Then he says, well, he is feeling sick. Oh, he's sick. Okay, I will come and see him. So then after the class they went back home and they told him that he said he will come. He said, how he will come to our house, like that. Next day morning, Prabhupada goes for morning walk, and instead of going to Victoria, from Park Street, suddenly he turns his route. He turns right, he takes one gully and another gully and another gully, and all the devotees are following him. They think, where is he going? Where Prabhupada is seriously chanting and walking, and after going few gullies, he comes to this man's house. He rings the bell. So the son comes down. He is getting ready to go to school, and he comes down with the uniform, and he sees, Prabhupada with all his disciples in front of his house. Already the whole road is gathering because of this thing, and it's a huge crowd in front of his house. And Prabhupada just walks up, and a couple of devotees went in. It's a small staircase, so he goes to the house, and then he knows the whole house, so he goes straight to the bedroom, and there is this man laying down. He's not sick, he's just laying down. He's old. I mean, he's 1 year elder than Prabhupada, so he's quite old. And, family life and conditioned soul, so he's more tired and broken up and like that. So Prabhupada goes and sits next to him, and he said, and pokes him on his side with his hand like this, like friends do. He said, hey, you didn't come to see me, in Bengali. And then he lifts his eyes and he sees, suddenly he's completely shocked that all the Hare Krishna devotees are in his house. Then he tells his wife, please bring something for him. And then they go on talking, and Prabhupada says that, see, my disciples, they have to learn Sanskrit. So I told you, you should help me. So you should come and teach them Sanskrit. It will be very good. And he said, you can travel around the world with me and you teach them Sanskrit. So why don't you do that? So he says, Swamiji, I am retired and I am very old and I don't have any spiritual energy. No, you have the spark. It is the same spark like in me. It's the same spiritual spark in you. So you should, now he speaks in English so that everybody else understands. Then he says, no, you should join this movement. This is very important. And then he says, Bharata Bhumite Manusha Janma Hoila Jar. So you should perfect your life. And better late than never. And then he takes little rasgulla and drinks water. And then, like old days, he takes this man's chadar and wipes his hand in it. And then he pats him on his back. Then he said, you should come. I will take you. You should come. And then Prabhupada gets up and then, he tells his followers that I used to sit here and, we come in the morning from here. We took that road to go to the school. And he said he was a very intelligent student. He used to score more than me and all that. And then they come down. And Prabhupada continues to go to Victoria Memorial, and then he came back. And that afternoon around 3 o'clock, Junior Ganguly said that around 3 o'clock when he came back from the school, the father asked for some water. Then he just leaned back and then he said that Bhaktivedanta Swami will take me. And he closed his eyes. That was it. It's amazing. That day was his departure. Or maybe by seeing Prabhupada, he got so excited. You know, when you become so happy also, your heart stops. And he was not any especially sick or anything. He was just old age. He was healthy. There was no sickness. And he saw Prabhupada, and you know, that interaction with Prabhupada accelerated him so much that that was it. He left his body. So Miss Junior Ganguly told that I was there when he left the body, and I could see that actually he has been taken by Prabhupada. He said, "You come, I will take you." And when he said that in the morning, we were thinking he's telling, "You come to ISKCON and I will take you to America," or something. But we didn't understand that this is what he meant. He actually took him. So then he said, "That's why when you called up, I said, you come." Then he said, "In fact, actually, our head office is in Calcutta, and we are already life members." He said, "I just wanted to share this with you, that's why I called you." And after that, he came next Sunday, even though he was a very busy man. He came for the Sunday program. I remember he was coming from there, every Sunday he was coming to the program. And so this, in something that Prabhupada told him before, that I will do something and I want your help. And Prabhupada actually offered him, yes, you should come and do the Sanskrit teaching. And because he was not ready to do that, he was mentally like so tired, so Prabhupada took him to the spiritual world.
Prabhupada, you know, he would always have he would make comments about my son, because my son at 2 years old started wearing glasses. You know, he had poor eyesight, and Prabhupada would always comment, you know, his glasses are bigger than his head. You know? And, you know, he would say things, you know, if Upendra mentioned, you know, that Somya was being, you know, Prabhupada would inquire about Somya, and Upendra would say, "Oh, he's well, Prabhupada, you know, sometimes he's naughty, and, you know, this or that." Prabhupada would say, "Well, naughty means intelligent, you know." And he said he should learn Sanskrit from Pradyumna. You know?
Another time in Vrindavan, I was serving Srila Prabhupada on a few occasions when he was sickly. And I remember one time in the evening, we would, of course, set up his mosquito net, and he was not feeling well at all. I think that was the first time we had 24-hour kirtan in our movement at that time. So I would massage him in the evenings sometimes with Vicks Vapor Rub, actually. Prabhupada liked when I rubbed that on. So in Vrindavan, you know, we're not supposed to step on even an ant in Vrindavan. You have to be very careful of the living entities there. They are not ordinary. So I'm sitting on Srila Prabhupada's bed inside the mosquito net, but somehow or another, one mosquito got inside the net. So I immediately saw it fly by, and I grabbed for it. And Prabhupada said, "No." So I kept massaging. Then the mosquito landed on Srila Prabhupada, and I flicked it away. Srila Prabhupada turned to me and said, "Now catch it, he is attacking."
In the course of taking care of Manisha, who was only a 13-year-old child at the time, she went through a lot of stages. And her mother, Antajana, had gone to Srila Prabhupada and said, what should I do with her? What's the best thing? And he said, you should simply keep her comfortable. So that was a very loose, kind of direction to go in, because comfortable could mean drugs or medication, or could mean moving, and so many things. So we kind of improvised from that basic direction to go in. So we brought her to the Himalayas in the hot season and did so many things. And the mother's becoming anxious, and she was near dying, and so she really wanted to see Prabhupada to ask, and she was so distraught. So it was just before the evening artik, and Prabhupada was getting ready to go with Harisari, was his servant at the time. So we were able to go in, and there was myself and Antujana, the mother, and the girl, Manisha. So we went in the darshan room, and the mother said, Prabhupada, you know, she said, I don't know what to do, you know, she's dying. And Prabhupada's eyes got, you know, huge and said, we are all dying. For you, tomorrow, for me, next week, we're all dying. And the way that he said it was like, where have you been? What have I been saying? What have I been preaching? Why did I come here? I came here to show you that we're dying, and it's just a matter of time. You should chant Hare Krishna. And he was becoming like really kind of almost outraged, like this would be a surprise that, you know, you're now dying. And we were kind of thinking maybe we'd get some empathy of a different sort, some sympathy, like, oh, I'm so sorry, but there was nothing. He cut to the chase immediately. There wasn't any type of soft pedaling, nothing like that, just right to it. And it really kind of threw us all back. And so Manisha was having a really hard time chanting, as you would. You know, she's 13, she's a bag of bones, and she didn't want to chant 16 rounds every day. So she asked Srila Prabhupada, you know, what should I do? You know, what'll happen to me if I don't chant 16 rounds? And he said, you'll be born, you know, in an aristocratic family or educated and wealthy. But he said, chant Hare Krishna. Simply chant Hare Krishna.
We were walking, this was in Cheviot Hills, because either he would go to Venice Beach or Cheviot Hills most frequently. So we were in Cheviot Hills, and this was the time frame where Bali Mardon was involved with that Japanese woman. It turned out to be a big sham, but at the time everyone thought she was heir to Toyota Fortune and so forth. So he was dressed in his kind of John Lennon outfit, you know, all white with the gold chains and everything. And he was always very much a gentleman, as my experience, Bali Mardon. So we were walking, and there was about 6 of us. And Karandar and Bali Mardon and I had kind of lagged behind towards the end of the walk, because I was asking, I mentioned this to Karandar, and now I was bringing up to Bali Mardon of whether he could loan some money to San Francisco Temple, because we wanted to buy this property in Hayward. And we were going to kind of expand the temple in that direction where householders could live. They had some duplexes. So I was running that by him. And I remember during the conversation kind of thinking, well, you know, this is kind of a big deal. Maybe we'll get this money and so forth and so on. And during it, we'd kind of drop back, and we were having our little private discussion. And Prabhupada was walking ahead, and it was towards the end of the walk, so we were still talking. We got into the car, and Prabhupada was almost to the car. And he stopped and turned around and looked at us, because he was with the other devotees and even saying some things to them. And he turned and looked at us, and I remember it hit me, because the look he gave was not at all pleased. You know, it was like, I mean, Prabhupada's looks could be very complex. There was a lot going on there. But I don't know, the best way maybe I could describe it, how I felt, was kind of like, you know, there you are, playing with the broken glass. You know, you think that you're making some plan to expand the movement, and here is Krishna's pure devotee, and you've like, you know, separated yourself, and you're in this, you know, mental state. And of course, then it turned out that there wasn't even any money there. You know, it even exacerbated the foolishness of it. But I still remember that look very clearly, and it was like, gee, Christmas, what am I thinking? You know, I'm back here. We could talk about this anytime. These precious moments with Prabhupada, I'm letting my little sense of self-importance run away from me.
Backtracking a bit, in I think it was 1971, I was drafted. I was living in Washington, D.C., the national capital. And here I was, I got draft notice. And so I wrote Srila Prabhupada, said, what should I do? He said, I'll write you a letter. So he wrote this letter. You know, the key line was, my disciples do not have time to squander. in this activities. Anyways, I presented that paper, and luckily my draft board was San Francisco. I had to register in San Francisco, so I guess, anyways, it worked. Srila Prabhupada's letter worked.
So I had a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita where there is a picture of Prabhupada holding a champak flower like this with a lot of sandalwood paste and the flower garland, and he's holding the flower and he's looking like this. So that was the only book I had where I could show him some work of ISKCON. Other Bhagavatam volumes have been sold and we have to get back to Bangalore. So I brought that book with me. And I went to meet him because he's the chief of the 3000. So I went and showed him some things about ISKCON and then showed him this picture. Said, this is our Guru Maharaj. He has translated these books. So he looked at that picture for a while. And he brought some things from his little box, some thread and some things like that. And he was measuring Prabhupada's forehead and his ears and things like that. It took about 10-15 minutes, and then he shook his head. Then he said that all the 4 Vaishnavacharyas, he said, in one person. So then he looked at me and he said, you know that we are Shaivites, and because we are not impressionless, so we have nothing opposite to Vaishnava Sampradaya. But we are worshippers of Shiva. So we do bhakti to Shiva in person. And he said, these Vaishnava Sampradayas, all the 4 acharyas, if they come in one body, that is how this person's features are. And he said, I'm an expert in Samudrika Lakshana Shastra. I can see from here. I wish you have showed me a full picture. So then I had a picture that I was worshipping. So I took that picture out and I showed him. Then he again went on. And he has his lens. And he did another study. Then he said that I was not wrong. He said, they are all working through this person. Then he said, you are very fortunate to be with him. Then he said that some movement like that, this is what I would like to be in my next life. So then I said, but I thought your ultimate is go to Kailash. Then he said, yes, if I go there, and Kailash exists for a long time, so I can always tell Lord Shiva that I want to join some movement like this, and I want to spread dharma everywhere. Then he was very happy, and he said that, you please give this book to me. I want to keep this, because this has given me the highest experience of studying a person's feature. So I want to keep this book with me. So I gave it to him as complimentary copy.
Prabhupada had been just, how he would sometimes speak on kind of things dealing with how the way people are in the world, the way the world works, and so forth, from a Krishna conscious perspective. So he was doing that, and somehow I was giving very good responses to those observations. Like he would say something, and then I would come up with an observation that he liked. I mean, it was apparently he liked it. He would smile. Like, for example, he had these little glass for eyeglasses, little tissues that you clean with. He pulled one out, and he was saying something like, these things they cost them nothing to manufacture, and they sell them for 3 rupees or something. And I would said something to the effect like, yes, Prabhupada, that's the profit motive of the karmis. He goes, yes, So it was kind of like that. It went on a few times like that. And I started to get a little sense of myself as really, like right there with Prabhupada, having these exchanges. It was subtle, but somehow my ego was, swelling up a little bit inside me. And so then I asked him something about Iran, because there was some question with the Treya Rishi and going there. And so I brought it up, and it's like Prabhupada looked at me, and it's like, by then I think he kind of had enough. He looked at me. It was like, he just kind of looked away, And to this day, I don't know what was going on, whether he was just thinking of something else. But to me, it felt like he was saying, okay, we're going to squeeze you down the sides. And he looked away, and I felt really, really bad, like, well, yeah, I was getting full of myself, and, I'm so conditioned, And so I felt bad, even on into the night. I really did, you know, because in Mayapur, you know, it's such an atmosphere. Everything is amplified. So the next morning we were having the Guru Puja, and Prabhupada would circumambulate the temple room, you know, inside. Go around, he would stop and ring a bell at different spots. The devotees would get real ecstatic, you know, how it was all around him chanting, and he'd ring the bell in time with the kirtan. So he started to do that, and we just made the first stop, and I was chanting. I was feeling very blissful, but I still had that little thing in my heart of, you know, I was such a klutz, you know. And just as I was kind of thinking that and feeling kind of the dichotomy between the bliss of the kirtan and that little pebble in my shoe, Prabhupada turned and looked right at me as he's ringing the bell. And he just looked at me for like, I don't know how long, but a long time, and just smiling, just radiating bliss, you know. And I just, you know, it kind of just washed over me, and it was like, don't take it too seriously. I was just cuffing you a little bit, you know.
I remember at that lecture that night, someone dressed as people did back then, almost like in the hippie era, long robes with moons and stars and long hair, very carefully arranged, came in and sat erect during the entire lecture, and then stared, glaring almost at Srila Prabhupada, said, what about Buddha? And so Srila Prabhupada said, what about Buddha? He just stared him right back. And he said, well, can you see God? And Srila Prabhupada said, no, you are in the way. So the funny thing is that whoever it was smiled after that and was not in the least bit annoyed and stayed around afterwards.
When we were living here in Los Angeles, and Upendra was serving Prabhupada, he was cooking for him daily, and was going to leave and go off traveling with him to be his servant. Upendra was in his room one day, and Prabhupada took a $20 bill and handed it to Upendra. He said, this is for your children. And Upendra right away, responded, oh, Prabhupada, we can't take this from you. You're our spiritual master. We should be giving to you. And Prabhupada said, no, this is for your children. I'm not their spiritual master. They will have to take their own. So it was right away. Upendra brought the $20 bill home, and it was, we just knew right away at that point. Prabhupada was telling us he wasn't going to be on the planet for our children to take initiation from. That was going to be something that they were going to have to seek out their spiritual master and take initiation on their own. That it wasn't an automatic given that all of our children would be the disciples of Prabhupada.
One time I remember talking about how light and gentle Srila Prabhupada's body was, but one time I remember massaging Srila Prabhupada, and sometimes his body would seem heavier than the heaviest. I was massaging, and Prabhupada turned and said, harder, and I started massaging harder. Prabhupada said, harder. I turned to massage harder. Prabhupada stopped me and looked at me, turned around and said, do you know what hard means?
Later on, I worked with the famous road show with the Radha Damodar. And anyways, we got to marketing the road show. This was in '72. It was a little bit, we were on thin ice, we thought at the time, with the music. Srila Prabhupada listened to the music. He liked it. He actually later on went to a large performance we had in Pittsburgh, and he liked it. Gave a lecture there. But early on, I was asked to show Srila Prabhupada the advertising material we had. So I was engaging ISKCON artists, and I saw the cover of the Srimad Bhagavatam recently completed by Muralidhar, which was a remake of Srila Prabhupada's original one that he had done in Delhi back in, who knows when, '64 or something. the ones that Srila Prabhupada brought. So it was a remake. And so this poster was largely utilizing that art. And I said, so Srila Prabhupada, this actually was your idea, pointing to the fact that Srila Prabhupada had designed the cover of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he looked at me like, nice try. Like you're trying to, it's your idea. The disciple is trying to flatter. And he just looked at me like pitiful. And he says, what my idea? It is all in Shastra. So Srila Prabhupada would never go for that.
We were in the room. I was there with, I forget who else was there. It was just maybe another person with me. I know there's one other person. And then Krishna Das came in with his wife. And I don't really know what reminded me of this, but he came in with his wife, and he'd been in Sweden trying to open the temple. And he had a wife and a little son. And so they came in and they were telling Prabhupada, basically explaining. We'd been in there talking to Prabhupada, and then he came in, he'd just come in and arrived. He was basically explaining to Prabhupada why he hadn't been able to stay in Sweden. And I was in there was another brahmachari with me, and we kind of looked at each other because his wife had come in wearing a sweater that was a rather tight-fitting sweater. You know, for us, it was like, really, it seemed, it's not really appropriate. You're coming for the guru, you know. You should wear a sari and so forth, dress modestly, you know. And so, you know, it just seemed a little, and then Krishnadas was kind of making these, Prabhupada was pushing him a little bit. But, you know, he was kind of making what seemed to us kind of excuses, right? And so after he gave his spiel, Prabhupada was listening and so forth, and he was all done. And I didn't know, I have any idea how Prabhupada would respond, of course. You never do. And Prabhupada looked at him kind of, you know, thoughtfully and said, he simply said, his name was Krishna Das, as I said, he goes, you are not Krishna Das, you are Maya Das, you know. And it was like, whew, you know. And it kind of fit. There was his wife, you know, and Prabhupada said, he goes, when I came to your country, he goes, there was no question of peaceful retreat. He goes, it was victory or death. You know, really like hammering him, you know. We're like, wow. And, you know, Krishna is kind of like, you know, kind of see him getting smaller, you know. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, you know, he's getting smaller. And then Prabhupada kind of lightened up. And, you know, at the end, he said, can I have my son touch your feet? Prabhupada said, yes, sure. So he did that, and he left the room. But it was, you know, obviously a lesson to us that Prabhupada was not that pleased when we rationalized things, you know. It would have been better just to say, I really couldn't cut it, you know, and so forth.
At the same time when he was serving Prabhupada, he was outside Prabhupada's door. He was waiting to hear if the bell was going to ring for him. And he was talking to other devotees out there. And Prabhupada rang the bell, called him in. He says, who are you talking to? He says, I'm talking to the devotees Prabhupada. He says, what are you talking about? He says, oh, just talking about the other things, other devotees. And he says, that is gossip. He said, gossip will destroy this movement.
Another time I remember, same thing happened with a dance expert in Madras. And that time we had this Fairchild movie thing, and it showed Prabhupada speaking. So we used to turn that thing around and throw it on the wall. And there's a lot of dance students there, and his name is Dhananjay. He's a very good dancer himself, his wife also. So he looked at it and then he said, can you replay this for me? So I was replaying, and again he wanted it to be replayed. And then he was explaining Prabhupada's class in terms of Bharatanatyam to his students. And it was a very intense class. Prabhupada was speaking about how the power of devotion and the chanting of the holy name, if somebody is chanting the name, he has already performed all the sacrifices and tapas, everything in his previous life. And Prabhupada was very intense speaking in that. His face was changing, his moods were changing like every 2 minutes. And he was sometimes like very jubilant, sometimes like frustrated that people are not taking to it. And And it was like a dance program, except that he was not moving his limbs, and he was making mudras while he was speaking, hand like this. So he would stop, and then he would say, see, and then he was quoting from the Nritya Shastra of Bharat, and saying that these are the different ecstasies that we are learning in theory. And you see, and he said that in 28 minutes, he said this gentleman went through all that. And then we played it again, and he went again explaining that. I took notes of that. And later when I compared with Nectar of Devotion, it was like, 3-4 subheadings of the Nectar of Devotion, all experienced by Prabhupada in explaining philosophy of just chanting the holy name. It was not Rasa Leela, or it was not intimate pastime, or it was nothing of that sort. It was simply about how one should take to the chanting of the holy name and what happens when one takes the chanting of the holy name. And it looked like preliminary preaching, but in explaining that, Prabhupada's body went through the whole ecstasy of that. So he was saying that, then when he finished that, I said, there is a famous verse in the Brahma Samhita that every word is a song, and then every movement is a dance. And this man took it so serious that in his concerts, he has that verse sung in the first. When he starts the invocation, he has that Katha Ganam Gamanam Natyam verse first. And then with that, he starts the invocation. So this is how, like these are areas where people are inspired, from an Arya Samaji to a Gaudiya Maharaj. And we know how he has inspired the movement, but this is how he has inspired others.
The Rath Yatra in '76 was the first Rath Yatra in New York. There had been many attempts to have small ones in Central Park without permits, but it's a very, very difficult city to get a permit in. And there had been a mayor's edict in 1962 saying no new parades on Fifth Avenue. And yet somehow or other, now with the advent of our new temple, the 55th Street Temple, and the moving of Radha Govinda into Manhattan, which was what Srila Prabhupada had wanted, there was to be a Rath Yatra. ISKCON was to be 10 years old now, 1976. So for the birthday celebration, there was to be a Rath Yatra on Fifth Avenue. Well, how to do that? No, it's illegal. So Srila Prabhupada even called from India to find out if we'd gotten the permit on the telephone, which is very rare in those days for Srila Prabhupada, because even get a phone call from India was difficult. There was no good phones. And he specifically asked, and the police department had initially said yes, and then said no, and I was in charge of getting this permit. So it's a long story, and it's an interesting one, but since Srila Prabhupada is the focus, I'll just say that in the very end, I had so-called last piece of paper to be signed by the chief of police himself in what was called then Police Plaza 1, the south tip of Manhattan. And they said, we're just going to run it down, and he's going to sign it, it's going to be over. And I said, no, I'm going to run it down. So they said, all right, if you want, you can go. I said, I will, thank you. Because Srila Prabhupada had called on the phone. I get down, take the subway down to that particular building, go through all kinds of heavy security, get up to the right floor, and find his secretary. And she looks at the paper and says, he's never going to sign this. She quotes, there's a mayor's edict, no new parades on Fifth Avenue. I ignored her. I hopped over the turnstile, which was some kind of a minimal barricade, went right into the guy's office. It was like out of a movie, a big fat guy, been in the force for 1,000,000 years. I put it on his desk and say, you're to sign this, if you will. He looks at it, starts chuckling, and says, I don't know why I'm doing this. Now, of course, I did by now. Srila Prabhupada wanted it. Srila Prabhupada wanted it, and Krishna in his heart. And he seriously looks right at me and he says, I don't know why I'm doing this. And he signed it. So here he was, the leader of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We're looking in mundane terms here. It was, in effect, the birthday of ISKCON, July of '76. He's surrounded by disciples praising him. And what does he do? He turns to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who was then GBC president of the New York Temple, and he said, who did it? He doesn't say, I did it. Because all of ISKCON, of course, was operating off of his energy very clearly. Or yes, is all glorious. He turns to him and says, who did it? He knows things happen, as he says in the very introduction of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that everything comes down to people, the persons. And it's a personal movement. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, well, Jayananda built the carts and Tosan Krishna got all the permitting. And so Srila Prabhupada, right then and there, wrote me a thank you letter. So it's interesting. It's a note.
Some other times we met with Prabhupada in his room in L.A. I remember one occasion we were traveling in Sankirtan down there, and this was very early, may have been the first traveling Sankirtan party, certainly among the first. And we just started selling big books in San Francisco. It kind of caught on, and people were going out and so forth. So we were down there, but it was very new. And as I mentioned, Buddhimanta, Yogesh Chandra, Keshav, and I were on this party, and we were getting some criticism because we weren't really at the temple eating temple prasadam and so forth. But to us that was kind of part of the whole spirit of it. You're out there on the front lines, and I don't know what we would eat, like sour cream and dates or something, a lot of that kind of food. But a lot of days we wouldn't get temple prasadam, and so forth, and you figure out ways to offer foods and so forth in that situation. But we were getting criticized from some quarters, so we went to Prabhupada and just kind of said, we think we're doing the right thing, but some people say no, we need to be eating temple prasadam. It's not good for our spiritual life. I remember Prabhupada looked at us and he leaned forward and he took his hands like he was playing kartals, like doing Sankirtan. He goes, you just go out and sell my books, like that. He goes, you can eat it. Like that, real forcefully, And we were like, of course, totally vindicated. And it's like, yeah, okay, we do understand what he wants, out there selling his books is the right, kind of smash the critics, once and for all.
I was always humbled by Prabhupada in some way. Likewise, Prabhupada was always instructing him in a very gentle and loving, fatherly way. That because Upendra was always free and ready to come and serve Prabhupada and travel with him. By the time I had children, Prabhupada, would question him on occasion, well, what about your wife and children? How will they be who will take care of them? And of course, Upendra was leaving, and we were on welfare, and it was that sort of situation. Prabhupada, Upendra would try to explain to Prabhupada how, and he says, "You're foolish." He would tell him, he says, "You're foolish. You must take care of your wife and children."
In Allahabad, when Prabhupada was there in the Kumbh Mela, one Ramanandi, a Brahmin, came to see him. During the traveling of Bullock cart, we have stayed in his house, so we invited him to come to Allahabad. He wanted to know when Prabhupada would be in India, and he was there in Allahabad, so he has come to see. It was an Ekadasi day, and the Kumbh Snan is going to be happening in next day. And that day is the first Snan, first bathing, and then second bathing is going to happen. So Prabhupada is sitting, stretching his legs under his desk like this, and his feet are like that, and he is sitting back like that. So it's Ekadasi. So Prabhupada is talking about Ekadasi. And then Prabhupada says, Ekadasi, lotus feet fried in ghee. you see, that is very good for Ekadasi. And he is closing his eyes and shaking his head like lotus seed fried in ghee. It was the best thing for Ekadasi. So somebody immediately went to arrange that just by hearing it, so running out to the market. You know, Kumbh Mela is like filled with lakhs of people. 2 minutes later, this man arrives, this Ramanandi Tilak, which is young son, maybe 9 years old. He comes and pays obeisances and he sits there and he has a cloth tied up on his shoulder. And then he puts on Prabhupada's desk and he opens it. And Prabhupada looks at it and he puts his hand like this, a whole hand like that, and then like eating that. And then he said, just see, there was lotus seed fried in ghee. He just said it 2 minutes before. And he said, just see, it has come. And then he looks at the Ramanandi and he said, how are you? Prabhupada used to stay in a house of a Bengali in Ferozbad, one town there in UP. It's called Gaurnitai Bhavan. It's a Bengali. They have Gaurnitai deities at home, and this man happens to be their family priest. Even though he's a Ramanandi, he did the Gaurnitai worship for them. And he lives in a village. He has his young son. So Prabhupada takes little and then gives out like that. Then he said, so you haven't taken bath in the confluence? In Hindi, he's saying, in Sangam you haven't taken bath? He said, Swamiji, I have come to take bath in Sangam. Then the next thing he does is he's got a plate, he's got a pot, and he puts the plate under Prabhupada's feet, just like this. And I was just behind Prabhupada's seat. So I could see that when he put the plate, Prabhupada just adjusted his feet on the plate, like putting his feet on his plate. And the next thing is he has got the Sangam water in his pot, and then he bathes Prabhupada's feet. And like this. And then he's chanting his mantras, and he's bathing Prabhupada's feet, and Prabhupada looking at him, big smile on his face. And during that time, it was very rare to get Prabhupada's Charanamrit. We're talking of 77, So it's like it's 76 December. So everybody is just looking at it, and then so he takes the water and puts on his head and then drinks, and then he sprinkles on everybody. Then he says, your feet is the actual Sangam. Then he says, what will we get in bathing that Sangam? Then he shakes his head and he says that, actually, because your feet will make this Ganges purified, and I know you are not going there. You won't go there, so I brought the Ganga here. So then he said, part of it I will mix in the Ganga. And then Prabhupada just smiling like that. Then he said, give me your son. Says, I will make him Acharya. So then the man says, he is yours, Swamiji. You can take him any time. And Prabhupada says, no, any time means no time. You give him now. I will make him Acharya. So then he says, Swamiji, he is just learning grammar now in Sanskrit. So to study the Bhashyas, the commentaries, he must know some grammar. Once his Vyakaran is over, then I will hand him over to you. He is yours. And Prabhupada is insisting. He says, no, what grammar? You don't need grammar. You give him to me. I will make him Acharya. Now this was the 4th time Prabhupada was saying him. Then this man said, Swamiji, I am not saying no. Everything mine is yours. He said, but he is too small. He will be only a trouble for you. So just few more years, I will hand him over to you. Okay, theek hai. Then he extended his hand like this and rubbed this boy's head like that. And then there were other visitors, the All India Radio was coming, so, this man left. And then so many years passed by, and I'm taking Gurukul boys to Allahabad, Ardha Kumbh Mela, for them to see the different groups and akhadas and learn something, laboratory work. So I have about 10 Gurukul boys with me, and I have heard during that time that the Ramananda Sampradaya, after so many years, they were broken into lot of sects. And especially the sadhu sect of their group was not interacting with the other groups. But that year I heard that they have elected one leader for their sampradaya, for the whole sampradaya, which was like, you know, difficult to believe. They will never come together. They were all fighting. And now they have selected one man as the supremo of all their sect. So there was a huge Ramananda stall there, in the camp. So I told the boys that you should see this, because God knows tomorrow one of you may be becoming a guru. So you should see this, how this is being done. He has united this whole sampradaya. It is very unheard of. And I heard that he's a very young sannyasi. So we will go and have his darshan. So we went to see him. And because I had South Americans and Australians, so we were given a little priority. So we go forward, and he was sitting with the heads of the different akhadas there. There was about 100 people there. They were all men with long beards and matted locks of hair, and they were all like 3 times elder than him. And this very young man sitting there on the big seat, and few people doing chamara for him. And so we went in and we paid obeisances, and one devotee, one Gurukul boy, Prem Vikas from South America, loudly chanted the Sannyas Sukta, which is a tradition to greet sannyasis. And as he started chanting, everybody just became silent. And this Maharaj, young Maharaj, was sitting there, and then he heard it. And then after he finished chanting, I heard him saying, there's no microphone or anything, and everybody is silent. And I just heard him saying, and I heard it was a poetry. He's composing a poetry straight there in Sanskrit. And that was about Prabhupada. So he is saying, the Acharya of the Hare Krishna movement, he starts like that. Then he says that if I say, like, this is the sloka he has composed, he said that if I say that neither in the past nor in the future, if I say this word, that neither in the past nor in the future there will be an Acharya equal to him, I won't be committing an offense to the founder of my line, who is Ramananda. Then he says, because Ramananda has predicted that Vishnu worship will spread around the world, and it will be done in a very easy way, and the whole world will take to it. And then he said that he has done in his commentary a prediction about this. Then he said, and as he was talking, I just realized this was that same small boy who Prabhupada just rubbed his head like this. And then he was telling him, the same person. I can hear his voice, and then I saw him moving. I said, but this is the same person. So then he finished that. That is where this slogan came from. Nacha bhuto na bhavishyati. We print in our Centennial magazine. That was his composition. Nacha bhuto na bhavishyati. Neither in the past nor in the future. So then he finished the sloka, 4 slokas on Prabhupada glorification. It ended with glorification of Jagannath. And then he called each boy separately and gave them pavitrams and all the honors that he gives to the gurus in his line. He gave them each one. You take this, take this, like that. And then I went up. Then he said, he looked at me and he said, Atma Tattva Prabhu, you remember me? And then he said, you used to carry me on your back. When we were staying in his house, that was the, that was the thing. He was calling Loknath Maharaj old man because he had this white hair. So I was carrying him on my back. I was a brahmachari, carrying this boy on my back. So he remembered that. Then he said that Prabhupada spoke about becoming Acharya. Then he said, my father passed away. He never brought me to the Hare Krishna movement. But he told me that I have to study the Shankara Bhashya because that is what I have to defeat. So to study that, he said, that was his last wish. So I had to fulfill that. So I went to Banaras. I stayed with the Mayavadis And I studied the commentary of Shankara for 4 years. And he said it was so painful for me. And then I came study my Acharya's commentary. And then I saw that the whole sampradaya is broken like this. So I thought that I have the blessings of Prabhupada. So maybe I could unite them. So he said, I tried for 9 years, and this year it happened, that we are all connected together now. So when he said, this is all the blessings of your Guru Maharaj. I told everybody. He said, Ramananda, he wrote a commentary. He says, that's right. Then he said that, but what Ramananda predicted, he said, as long as you are all broken like this, he said, we will never be able to do. Then he said, we don't have to do because it's already been done. These people have done, we just have to join them, and then we go and preach with them. And he was preaching to them using us as the catalyst there. He said, look at this movement they are spreading around the world. And it was great to hear from him.
The other program that we had was really different in tone. I had made friends with one of the professors at Berkeley. He was in the religious studies department, a fellow named Mark Juergensmeyer, who now is at Santa Barbara. Actually, I've seen him interviewed on CNN a few times about Islam and so forth. He's become a noted religious scholar. At that time, he was a younger professor, but he became quite friendly, and we had had some discussions. I said, well, Prabhupada is, ask him to come up, and what do you think about having a program with some of the faculty? And he was very agreeable to that. He was, enthusiastic to do it. And one of the people he invited was Dr. Stahl, who there had been that brochure of exchanges, remember, between Prabhupada and Dr. Stahl discussing the Vedas and kind of the meaning of the Vedas. It was a scholarly exchange. And Dr. Stahl had a little different view than Prabhupada. And it was printed as a brochure, and we used to pass it out kind of to validate the scholarly nature of our movement. And so Dr. Stahl was a bit of a well-known quantity in our movement. So yeah, that was good. He was coming. So we prepared a room, and there was going to be, and it ended up, there was about 40 or 50. Most of the faculty brought their wives. So there's 20, 25 faculty and their wives. So it was quite a big turnout for that kind of a group. But they were very interested to meet Prabhupada. And of course, it created a little buzz because of the background, the history, and so forth. So we set up a room, and we had, there was a table, so we brought a Vyasasan and put it on top of the table, which I think to them, when they came in, seemed a little pretentious. Here's this colorful, big chair with peacocks on it, that, the base of it is about head height for them, And Americans were all very egalitarian. Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time and so forth. So I could sense there was a little, not really, scorn, but a little bit of maybe a little questioning, of the appropriateness of it, perhaps. I sensed that a little bit. I hadn't thought about it before. So anyhow, that's there. And we had a few seats on the side. Pradyumna and Swarup Damodar and myself were there. I don't know if there were any others or not. But Prabhupada arrived, and I'd been there kind of fixing things, and then Prabhupada arrived, and everyone was seated by then. It was due to start at, say, 7, and then, so I went out to see if Prabhupada was there, and they were on time, so we started walking up, and I remember it was kind of, Berkeley has a lot of older kind of wooden buildings, and as we walk up, I was like, well, Prabhupada, it's kind of an old building, but, and he's like, we don't care, old or new, the building doesn't matter, right, So we walk up, and the entrance to the room was such that you entered from the back, or so to speak, to the backs of the people. They were facing the other way, and the entrance was the back. So as we opened the door, and Prabhupada walked in, I held the door, and he walked in, but I could see everyone's expressions. They turned around. And the minute they saw him, like I said, there was kind of a little bit of an edge, very subtle to the atmosphere. The minute they turned around and saw Prabhupada, he was, in his saffron, and he was smiling, and just such a, a transcendent figure. You could just see everyone melted right from the get-go. It was like, all their senses of any pretension or pomposity or anything was eliminated. And they just felt, well, here's a real saint. They could sense it. And Prabhupada smiled, and he walked up, and he got up there very naturally, like, yes, this is, I do belong here, I'm representing Vyas. And he spoke to them about Vedic culture and Brahminical culture and things, not really about Radha Krishna, but more about Brahminical culture and so forth. And I remember after the talk, as I said, the three of us were kind of sitting to the side here. And so one of the professors asked, he said, you're interested in making people Brahmins and bringing this to the West, that we need Brahmins. He said, what about your followers here? Are they Brahmins? I was thinking, I was wondering what's Prabhupada going to say, because really we're not, And but Prabhupada handled it so adeptly. He said, they are trying to become Brahmins. But his tone was such, it wasn't like they're just struggling vainly, but really, they're going to be successful. But now they're on the path. It was very nicely handled and disarmed the whole thing, and kind of gave us the appropriate status. That we were sincere and we were following the correct process. But yet, we were still conditioned in such a way that we're in the modes of, at least for me, certainly in the modes of passion and ignorance still. Predominantly. And he had a little exchange with Dr. Stahl when he got up there. He looked around, and he's glad. I think he was pleased by the turnout. Actually, he said, oh, I see Dr. Stahl is here. And he said something, I see the illustrious Dr. Stahl, or gave him flattered him a little bit. And that really made him very happy, of course, because, every time I saw Prabhupada interact with anyone, the one common theme was Prabhupada was always completely in command. And not by dint of assertiveness, but just by dint of everyone knew here was whatever level they understood it, they knew here's a bona fide representative of God. And there was never the trace of, lack of confidence, never any hubris or pride, but just that overwhelming sense of self-confidence that comes when you're actually self-realized. And, everyone there sensed that as well. So, he was, they were very flattered that he would acknowledge their scholarship and so forth. And then I remember we left the meeting, and Prabhupada said to me, he said, this was a very important meeting, to meet with these scholars like this, to establish the credibility of our movement. So that was nice, because it did go very, very well. And even one person came up to me, I don't know, it wasn't Stahl or Juergensmeyer, but one came up after me and said, I was a little skeptical in the beginning. It kind of confirmed my take on things. He said, I was a little skeptical in the beginning. He says, but once when I heard him speak, he goes, I thought, well, maybe this will be some kind of elderly Bengali Brahmin who's, a little bit caste conscious. He goes, after I heard him speak, I really understood this person is something very special. So that really kind of confirmed what I had perceived happening there in that room.
What I always remember most about Srila Prabhupada was that he was very youthful all the time. I remember in taking walks with him, it was hard to keep up with him. I remember in Los Angeles, I think we were delivering tapes of the roadshow to Srila Prabhupada, and so that he could give us his comments on them, the music later on, Mangalananda and so forth. And there was 5 or 6 of us on this walk, and we were puffing and couldn't keep up with Srila Prabhupada. So amidst all of his worldwide, his concerns, headaches, so to speak, his age and all his responsibilities, he remained a Vaikuntha man. He was always above it. In one sense, he seemed to be right in there, dealing with all the details. But it was always quite apparent that he was with Krishna. And he was a transcendental man, a Vaikuntha man, as he described his own Guru Maharaj.
There were times when he chastised us as devotees because someone had fallen away, had fallen down into a relationship with someone, and the devotees were so much shunning the person that they were humiliated to the point they couldn't come back to the temple, or just advised that they could not come to the temple because of their fall down. And Prabhupada was so disturbed by it. You know, he would write to us and say, now you have driven him away. You have humiliated him so much that he won't be able to come and do service and continue with service. You know, so it's, you know, Prabhupada was so loving and so accepting of anything that anyone could offer on any level. You know, that no one would have been a devotee had Prabhupada been so strict with everyone else. He was strict with himself, but very accommodating with anyone who was inclined to offer any loving service to him or to Krishna. You know, so that was those are Prabhupada's most magnanimous qualities in my eyes. You know, that's really how this movement began, and that's how this movement's going to continue, if we can, you know, take those, imbibe those qualities of Prabhupada's and carry on. You know, that we have to have that loving compassion for one another. Be strict with ourselves, yes, but have loving compassion for one another. That we need each other to be able to go back to Godhead. You know, we need the support of each other.
Prachur